I asked her if she was okay, and she says, no, I've got a toothache.
If she were 16 and were taken against her will.
If I had only seen what truck they left in.
If she was suffocated, for example, in a vehicle.
But I should have been there longer. I should have done more. What could I have done?
You're listening to True Crime Arizona, the podcast.
Before we begin the story, I want to let you all know what happened on the day this podcast episode was set to be released. For 40 years, Valentine Sally was unidentified. We began investigating this case in December of 2020. Our TV episode on the case aired February 12th. 2 weeks later, the Coconino County Sheriff's Office identified Valentine Sally, just hours before this podcast episode was set to come out. But to understand how major this development is and what happened 4 decades ago to this girl, I want to start at the beginning and take you back to where the story began in northern Arizona in 1982.
Oh gosh, I was just a young'un, and life was busy. We had moved over here from California, and we had started a truck stop, and I learned how to work on trucks, but my main thing was working in the restaurant.
A place many would never know existed, the Monte Carlo truck stop, nestled off the I-40 highway in Ash Fork, Arizona, a tiny town an hour outside Flagstaff. It's early February, 1982, a cold winter night. Patty Wilkins is working her graveyard shift at the restaurant on her parents' property.
2:30 in the morning.
It wasn't often young girls would be at the truck stop restaurant, especially overnight. If they were, Patty made it a point to check on them.
I would ask them, are you okay? Do you feel okay? Do you want to stay here with me?
That night, in walked a man she believes was in his 50s with a young blonde girl wearing a red and white striped sweater and jeans.
How old do you think she was by your time with her?
I would say she probably 17, 18, up in that range. She could have been more, she could have been less. She was a pretty girl. She really was, and she smiled a lot. The only thing I really got about him was he wore a cowboy hat with a peacock feather in it.
Patty watched the two, thinking something might be off, but everything about their interactions seemed normal.
He ordered coffee, she just wanted water, and I asked her if she was okay, and she says, no, I've got a toothache. I said, well, we can fix that. We fixed it with an aspirin, and she took it. She seemed very comfortable with this gentleman, because I asked her, are you okay here? Do you want to stay here? Do you want to leave with him? And she said, yeah, I'll go with him. Like it was her grandfather, her father, uncle, some relative.
But you really got the feeling that there was no like a hostage situation or a kidnapping.
The camaraderie between the two of them were like she knew him.
The man left her a quarter for a tip. Patty said that was very generous back then. She never saw which truck they came and left in.
The next thing I heard about was that they found a girl in February the 14th, a mile from my restaurant.
What is it about law enforcement that makes you tick?
I'm fascinated by the reasons why people do the things they do and the way they do them. That's always held a fascination for me since I was a child.
Stan Kephart has decades of law enforcement work under his belt.
I came to Arizona, where I was chief of police for the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, where I served until 2011.
He's been to many homicide scenes over his years in many different states. We reached out to him for his expertise, to ask him to review this case with us from start to finish.
When you first heard of Valentine Sally, what did you think?
It was curious from the onset.
Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1982. An Arizona DPS trooper was searching for a tire near the I-40 freeway exit between Ash Fork and Williams. That's when he saw a lifeless body underneath a cedar tree. The girl had on jeans that were dirty and ripped. Her sweater and bra were found on the ground nearby.
The evidence shows that her belt loops were ripped and it appeared she had been dragged on the side of the highway. Would that be signs of a struggle or something along those lines?
It could be post or after she was out, if she was suffocated, for example, in a vehicle, and then drug out of the vehicle by the belt loops to get to the location that her body was deposited. It could be to a struggle, but more likely it was done for the purpose of moving her.
The Coconino County Sheriff's Office was and is the investigating agency. They had her DNA, but nobody had reported any girls missing in the area, none at least that fit her description.
The DNA is of no potential use to you at that time until you find a person of interest, and then you do a comparative analysis to see if that person has that DNA.
Like with a family member?
Exactly, could be.
Soon after the girl's body was found, Patty got a call from investigators.
Well, first they showed me the pictures of the clothes. And yes, I recognized the clothes.
So she was wearing those clothes?
Yes, she was wearing those clothes. Then I had to go to Flagstaff. I had to look at the clothes she was wearing and her photos, and it was definitely the girl that I waited on. And I said, I know that girl. He said, can you describe who she was with? I said, yes, I can.
She told them about the man wearing the cowboy hat with the peacock feather, but she didn't know his name or anything about where he had been coming from or where he was heading to. Officials believe she was dead for about 2 weeks before she was found on February 14th. Patty believes she saw the girl at the restaurant around February 2nd. She was found in the clothes she had on that night at the restaurant.
Do you believe that man was involved in her death?
I'm not sure. He didn't seem the type. As I said, he was very concerned about her, about the toothache, but I would hope not. I would really hope that I didn't let her go.
The toothache. That's how investigators knew Patty had been the last to see this girl alive.
And when they interviewed me, he said, was there anything outstanding? And I told him about the toothache. And he said, and what did you do? I said, we crushed up a baby aspirin is all I had, and we put it on that tooth. He said, what side was it on? He said, left side. He said, that's our girl. The aspirin was still there.
Nobody knew who she was, so everyone started calling her Valentine Sally because she was found on Valentine's Day. It's a name that stuck with her for the days, months, and years that lie ahead.
How important is it to solve a Jane Doe case?
It is extremely important. This is a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a boyfriend, all of those who have no closure in their lives. They know that their loved one is missing. They don't know what happened to their loved one. They don't know if she's alive or dead, and there's no closure for them. My heart goes out to the victim. That is why I became a cop. Who's going to speak for the victim? Who cares about the victims? I do.
Stan Kephart says the details in this case are strange.
What's the likelihood that the man she was seen with is involved in this?
It is highly likely. The victims of homicides, more often than not, are victims from known persons, relatives, significant others.
But at the time, the medical examiner didn't find evidence of sexual assault.
Are you surprised that there was no evidence of sexual assault?
That is, again, very surprising. What would be the purpose of your anger or a vendetta of some type? I'm speculating now. Would be maybe a cause of doing this. That and the way that she died are two of the most curious things in this case.
The working theory is Sally died by suffocation, but she didn't have broken bones in her neck or chest.
Detectives currently think that suffocation played a part. Would normally the hyoid bone be broken in that case? 9
out of 10 times the answer would be yes, because a person would reflexively apply frontal pressure of the thumbs on the neck of a subject. That's not a trained way of choking somebody, but the pressure that comes from the thumbs inward tends to fracture the hyoid bone. That, along with the struggle by the victim, usually will produce a fracture.
With no evidence of sexual assault or broken bones, detectives had to start with what was there and what they did know. They knew about the toothache and aspirin.
How important can dental records and teeth be in a homicide case in terms of either identification or solving it?
They can be extremely important. Forensically, this is one of the things that is used pro forma to identify a person. Here's again the problem. We have thousands of millions and billions of dental charts all over the world, okay? We've got her dental impressions, but what do we compare it to get a match?
Well, in 1984, they did think they had a match based on bite marks from Valentine Sally. A girl named Melody Cutlip had run away from her Florida home in 1980. A forensic expert matched the bite marks to dental records from Melody Cutlip. But Melody's family never believed this body was their daughter. She returned home alive in 1986. Stan says this was a huge misstep in the investigation.
It is the fault of the expert presenting something that was flawed and the agency not vetting that person to conclude that it should be followed up on.
We asked Stan if he believes this is the work of a serial killer that's never been caught.
There's nothing specific that would indicate to me that it is a serial killer. However, there are cases where serial killers have committed crimes and killed their victims and then had a hiatus for several years and then resumed. But they usually do it in pattern format. It wouldn't be just one. It would be a series. They don't come back and just do one particular person. They continue.
There had been no developments or movement in this case for almost 40 years. Months ago, I had reached out to the Coconino County Sheriff's Office to discuss the details in this case and asked them to sit down with me for an interview about it. They gave us no indication any developments were about to happen.
Coconino County Sheriff's Department won't talk to me about the case. They say that it's an open investigation, so they can't comment. This case is from 1982. There's been no movement on it for decades. To me, that would be considered a cold case. In your expertise, why wouldn't the Coconino County Sheriff's Department take the opportunity to get the word back out there that maybe somebody sees it and they know something to talk about it?
I understand your journalistic frustration, and I dealt with it on a daily basis with news people as a chief of police. It's well-founded. You want in behalf of the people, you want in behalf of the justice to find out who this person is. They do as well. They share that with you. What they're saying to you is correct. If they were to give you the information that they have, it could cause the person who had committed this crime to take measures, once that becomes public knowledge, to defend himself or herself from what had happened, making it more difficult for law enforcement to pursue.
If I had only seen what truck they left in.
The mystery of what happened to this girl eats away at Patty.
Did you form any sort of almost emotional attachment?
Yes, to her. And it's, I don't know, it's terrible. I didn't have that kind of relationship with her. I wasn't there long enough, but I should have been there longer. I should have done more. What could I have done? What should I have done? I could have done something to save her.
Even though Valentine Sally's real identity wasn't known, it was Patty who made sure she was properly laid to rest decades ago.
We put up a jar, and because the truckers already heard about it, it was over the CB radio, so they all knew about it. And we got $300 in less than 45 days. And back then, that was a lot of money.
When we sat down with Patty in her home back in January, she had one hope and one wish about what would come of this story.
When I messaged you about Valentine Sally, what did you think?
I thought, I wonder if this lady's gonna find out who did it. That would be nice after all these years. I would be willing to get another headstone and put it up there if we could find out who she was. It would even put me to rest.
This is where we thought our investigation ended for now. Then on Monday, February 22nd, 2021, the unexpected happened.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Heather Moore. It is a major break in a true crime Arizona case. We now know the identity of Valentine Sally after 40 long years.
According to the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, Valentine Sally was identified as 17-year-old Carolyn Eaton of St. Louis, Missouri through DNA. I called Patty right away.
Well, I'm going to cry. As I said, it's like one of my girls, and it's only been me and her, and now she's got a family. Isn't that great? It doesn't get any better.
This is all Patty had hoped to find out in her lifetime.
I can't believe it. That was a godsend. It had to be.
As you can imagine, I had a lot of questions for Jim Driscoll, the Coconino County Sheriff. According to their office, a grant from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children paid for their office to get a familial DNA kit last year. Once they got a preliminary match from Valentine Sally's DNA to the Eaton family, they said they made contact with the family in December and prepared to go to St. Louis, Missouri and do a DNA swab of one of Carolyn Eaton's family members. Remember, I had been asking about this case starting in December. The sheriff's office wouldn't give me any information. They claim they left a voicemail for me in January to discuss the case off the record. I have no records on my phone of any voicemails left for me from their office. I had also been in contact with their public information officer and had emailed them a Freedom of Information Act request in early January for any files pertaining to this case to get more information, but never received an email back. My investigation aired on February 12th.
We didn't want to give you false hope that we were going to make a positive ID.
Sheriff Driscoll told me they received the positive ID confirmation 1 week after my story aired.
I wish we'd have been able to do this years ago, but we didn't have the capabilities that technology gives us today.
The sheriff says Carolyn Eaton had run away from her home in a small town outside of St. Louis around Christmas Day in 1981. He says an official missing persons report for her was not filed at the time.
And she had run away in December, and she was a troubled kid. She'd had some issues.
Peggy Harbkey lived across the street from the Eaton family in the 1980s. She still lives there today.
I'm very close friends with one of Carolyn's sisters, and I do know the other family members. I knew her mom when her mom was alive. I just knew that the family was terribly upset and that Carolyn ran away, but nothing was ever really found or nothing turned up about her.
Peggy says this development is huge for their tight-knit Missouri community.
It won't ever bring her back, but it does provide some closure and for the family, and I think that means a whole lot.
Half of the mystery is solved. We now know who Valentine Sally is, but who killed her?
We have evidence and leads that we are currently following that we're not able to share at this point. There's other indications of things that we're just not able to share at this point, things that only a suspect would know.
Remember, Patty had seen Carolyn at the restaurant that night with an older man wearing a cowboy hat with a peacock feather. There are rumors of potential suspects, possibly serial killers, that match that description. Men who have killed young girls and teens before in several states. Sheriff Driscoll does believe Patty was absolutely the last person to see Carolyn alive, and that the man she was with was likely involved in her death.
We're relatively sure within a short time, and that could be hours, it could be a day, of leaving the truck stop that she was killed. We have looked at a lot of possible suspects in this, even before she was identified. And there are a number of serial killers out there.
The search continues to identify the person who murdered 17-year-old Carolyn Eaton. But just knowing who she is and that she has a family fills a hole that's been in Patty's heart for 40 years. Valentine Sally has a name. That's all Patty ever hoped for.
We've got a name, and I'm no longer in charge of her. I would just say, I love you, and I'm glad you're going home.
If you have any information about possible suspects in the Carolyn Eaton murder case, please call the Coconino County Sheriff's Office. I'm journalist Briana Whitney. True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me and produced by Sergio Hernandez. You can find our podcast and latest investigations wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find the video versions of the podcasts on the AZ Family app, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire.